Hello and welcome to today's webinar on measuring and improving the ROI of your PR. We'll be going through some practical tips and advice that you can use to better evaluate how well your PR is working. But before we do that, I would like to jump into a few housekeeping items. First of all, I'm Chip Griffin. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for CARMA. We've got a great panel here that I'll be introducing in a moment. But first, I did want to go through those housekeeping items while people are continuing to filter in. First of all, there will be a replay available of this webinar. So if you're watching, you do not have to sit here and take copious notes. You'll have a replay at your fingertips afterwards. So feel free to stay engaged with the conversation. To that end, if you have questions at any point throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will integrate those questions throughout the panel discussion that we'll be having. In addition, if you're looking for more resources or information about CARMA, you can go to CARMA.com. We have plenty of resources, not just about the company, but also the Measurement Standard is our cornerstone publication that offers a lot of additional insights into measurement and evaluation of public relations and communications. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to be covering today. We'll be looking at how you can ensure that your media monitoring is timely, accurate, and complete. We'll be looking at how you can assess the ROI of your PR and communications far beyond just looking at financial metrics. And we'll look at how you can communicate your results more effectively to key stakeholders. You'll hear from a panel of our experts led by Kali Sakis, who is the Chief Insights Officer for CARMA. We have a truly global panel today. Kali is based in Melbourne. And then we have Maria Talakina, who is Insights Director from Dubai, and Orla Graham, who is Insights Consultant in London. And I'm based here in the United States. So we've got a whole slew of continents and time zones covered here and lots of different perspectives. So I know that we will have lively conversation when it comes time for the panel discussion. So at this point, I would like to hand over to Kali, who has 2 decades of experience in media analysis and really can offer some unique perspectives on how you can do your jobs more effectively, how you can communicate results more effectively, and how you can really up-level your game from here. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Kali.
Thank you, Chip. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us as we talk about my favorite topic with some of my favorite people. So thank you, Orla, Maria, and Chip for being part of our Measurement Month webinar on the ROI of PR. Before we get to the fun part, before we get to our panel discussion, I wanted to set the scene and talk through some of the timeless and proven approaches to demonstrating effectiveness of communications. These transcend trends. These are the things that we see when not implemented correctly or not considered fully. Measurement programs can run into problems or barriers to success. So I've got 5 points that I'd like to start with, Chip, just to really set the scene, to make sure that we're focused on the basics that actually set ourselves up for success when we're talking ROI, when we're talking anything to do with measurement and evaluation. As you've said, we've all had extensive experience in the industry. These 5 points are really the combination of 20 plus years of consulting with clients, making sure that their measurement resonates, that it delivers insight, but it also speaks to the impact. So let me take you through some of the enduring, timeless approaches that I think are very, very important for us to remember. As we talk more, our panel will talk a little bit more about what's hot right now and the trends that we're currently seeing. So first of all, I wanted to start at what I see as the most important step in measurement, evaluation, and learning, and that is SMART objectives. When you have SMART objectives agreed and aligned within the organization, you are set for success. Even committing to specific time-bound goals, you automatically are positioned as more strategic, and your contribution to the business is actually viewed far more stronger because you're going beyond activity. So SMART objectives are very, very important. They are, I guess, the least fun of the measurement tasks. I think we'd all like to focus on the creative of the campaign or the metrics that demonstrate impact or outcomes. But really starting off with the best step is to make sure that your objectives are SMART and that you have alignment on them. There are many different ways that you can approach writing your objectives for your year or for a specific campaign. I like to keep it really, really simple. And I use this template to really make sure that teams can articulate their objectives in a very simple way that obviously complies with the SMART objective framework. And let's walk through this. So the what is to really determine what is the desired output, outcome, or impact of the activity. This is really our North Star. Where are we going? What do we want to achieve? The who, reminder that audiences are incredibly critical to the planning stages of measurement and evaluation. So the who reminds us that the audience should be front and center of our planning and our objective setting. How much is to explain how much the metric should change as a result of the communications activity. And here we see we'd be looking for year-on-year increases. We'd be looking really to set an aspirational target as well as a threshold target. So a range of what you'd like to see those metrics do as a result of your activity. And finally, when. So decide on a time frame, making sure that our objectives are time bound. When do we want to see the desired outcome or impact achieved within the organization? We usually start with this type of template. We usually workshop amongst multiple teams and stakeholders. And when we have the answers in this simple template, we actually combine them to make sure that they're compelling sentences that can go on to become really inspirational targets for PR and comms teams. So I wanted to show this slide to really break down the steps of a really nice way to approach SMART objectives. Absolutely crucial if you want to be positioned as a strategic contributor in your organization. The second tip, and this comes through, there's so many measurement programs that we've embedded regionally and globally. It's absolutely crucial to understand what success looks like in your organization. And the big hint here is that your stakeholders will often see value or ROI very differently to what a PR and comms team do. So taking that time to actually map your stakeholders, to understand precisely what the campaign or what the activity needs to achieve in their mind will really set the scene for you to succeed, for you to have alignment with your most important collaborators. So understanding what success looks like to them, that really means spending time with the C-suite, with different functions, with marketing. It really requires a lot of collaboration and workshopping in this step. Some of the steps that we do at CARMA can really help teams assess what metrics will resonate internally. Absolutely important to understand that most teams sitting in your organization will have a different perspective. So what we advocate for as a fun way to workshop different stakeholder views is to start off to define success from the view of your PR and comms team. What would it look like? What would the numbers look like? What would the data look like? What would you have achieved? What would you need to see for it to feel like a success? Write those down. Write the metrics that you will measure that success down, and then put them to the side. Then we ask that people promote themselves to their CEO or to a board member, and to look at the same campaign or the same activity through the eyes of senior leadership. What would you expect if you were the CEO of your organization and you were looking down on all of the functions? What would you need to see from your communications team to have confidence that they're contributing at a strategic level linked to the organization's goals? Through this little exercise, we often find that there is a disconnect between the metrics that the communications teams are using and the view or the anticipated metrics that the CEO or the board wants to see. So small tasks, small workshops like this can really help you understand that there are different views, and that if you take the time out to understand and align on what success looks like throughout different functions in your organization, your measurement will resonate further and you will get much more engagement from every level. The third point, and I think the measurement community spends a lot of time reinforcing this point, but impact trumps activity. Always try and remember to focus in your conversations, in your reporting, in your measurement and evaluation and learning. Focus on the impact. Divert hours that you would normally spend on the activity and the creative and the campaign itself, and really try and reinvest that time to talk about impact and outcomes. This helps frame the campaign or the measurement program as more strategic. It also answers that so what to internal stakeholders as well. I've got 2 tips to really help make sure that you're focused on the impact and what's important. Overall approach is to start with the end in mind, and there's 2 questions that really help to sharpen your focus in this way. The first question is, what is the business impact or the organizational impact you're trying to achieve, and how can communications contribute towards that impact? Secondly, and most importantly, I think, is what is the human problem you're trying to solve? When we talk about measurement results and ROI, if you are talking about the business problem or the human problem, you are always going to appear more strategic, but also have that cut through to senior audiences. So these 2 questions can help guide you in terms of positioning your activity so that it is starting with impact, and that you're always emphasizing and focusing on the impact of your campaign. My 4th point here is one that is quite timely. We are working currently with a number of regional and global teams where this has become a crucial step in successfully demonstrating the value of PR or coming back with ROI metrics. And this is that true, comprehensive, holistic ROI requires deep collaboration, cooperation between different functions, and integration of different data sources. And this is where some of the most valuable and ambitious measurement goals often slip into chaos, because we don't have that buy-in from our stakeholders. 20 to 15 years ago, measuring PR was mostly focused on outputs. We mostly focused on earned media analysis to show the impact of a campaign. We've evolved a lot over the last 20 years. Now ROI, or the value of PR, rests in data sources well outside of earned media. Most will need people and culture to be involved for, obviously, employee satisfaction, employee engagement in internal communications. We're looking at sales data can become important, the marketing metrics that need to come into play for the PESO model. It requires deep collaboration, and we still find that there's significant silos and barriers to that collaboration and to data sharing internally, especially with larger organizations. So ROI does require you to have buy-in, and this is where it becomes less about data and analytics, but more about changing the culture of your organization, embedding that culture of sharing, collaborating, and working together to prove the value of PR and communications. So a big journey, and one that many global measurement programs really stall or hesitate at this step. It's a significant one. I think at the end of this, if we get that buy-in right from those key stakeholders, the results speak for themselves. I'll finish with just a note to the recommended resources that are available for anyone trying to elevate their measurement and evaluation. No matter where you are, whether you're just at the start of that journey or whether you have significant measurement and evaluation currently in place at a sophisticated level, there is always something that you can elevate. There is always something that you can optimize. We have two of the AMEC tools that we'd like to highlight today. One is the Measurement Maturity Mapper. This is in the form of a very short survey where you can put in what you are currently doing in your measurement and evaluation, and it will give you the actions that you need to take to actually elevate and improve your measurement according to best practice. It also gives you really valuable industry benchmarking so that you know where you stand amongst your industry peers, and so you can work towards elevating and improving. So the measurement mapper takes the guesswork out of improving your measurement and gives you very, very specific guidance. The integrated evaluation framework, the AMEC Barcelona principles, and the AMEC planning guide, all on the AMEC website, are incredibly useful and easy to use resources that can help you actually set your objectives and make sure that you're using the right metrics to measure your campaign right through from outputs right through to that all important steps of outcome and impact. So five small tips from me, Chip, before we start our conversation. I hope that sets the scene. These are timeless. These are the things that really set your teams up for successful ROI and measurement.
Thank you, Kali. That's, I think, a really helpful place to start. And speaking of places to start, I really like the fact that you have emphasized the importance of planning and preparation here. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about that and some of the challenges, perhaps, of reverse engineering it, right? I mean, so often, I'm sure you, as I do, talk with clients or the like who are trying to measure something that they didn't plan for, they didn't set the objectives in the beginning. So talk a little bit about that challenge of reverse engineering it, and maybe talk a little bit. The whole panel can talk about the process that we use at CARMA to try to think this whole thing through.
First thing, Chip, is that there's no judgment for reverse engineering. Quite often we're in rooms where we're at the end of a major activation, and somebody asks what were our communication objectives. That is something that is all too common, but no judgment from me, Chip. We can reverse engineer most things.
It's better to measure reverse engineered than not measure at all, right?
Exactly. I think that concept of starting with the end in mind and making sure that you've got those SMART objectives before going into the planning phase. It's the least, as I said, it's the least fun part of a whole activation, but it really does set yourself up for success. I think many teams globally have successfully gone ahead and created a final report from a campaign without having objectives at the start. What I think is the secret that good planning unlocks is that executive buy-in. If you're doing that planning and articulating your direction, telling the business where you want to go, then you get that buy-in from the start, and you're viewed, I think, more strategically. Your contribution is taken more seriously than if you haven't had those clear goals articulated at the start.
So maybe Orla or Marie, you could talk through a little bit of some of the process that we use to help clients along that journey.
Sure, I can jump in here. We've got a process that we use at CARMA called See, Think, Do. So this is a methodology and a framework that we developed because we were helping clients to build out measurement frameworks, very much in line with AMEC's integrated evaluation framework. But one of the challenges with that is that, first of all, it's easy to end up taking a kitchen sink approach where you start throwing all of the metrics you can possibly think of into the framework, and you start to lose that ability to see wood for the trees, so to speak. The second challenge with that is that it's sometimes difficult to then link any one of those metrics that you come up with back to that original objective. So the See, Think, Do methodology came about as a result of that, where we essentially apply this lens over the evaluation framework that allows us to get a little bit more structured and a little bit more focused. And it actually works really well for clients who maybe haven't had their SMART objectives in place quite as firmly as they would have liked at the beginning of the process. Because ultimately, it's boiling communications down to some very simple approaches. Who do you want to see your coverage? What do you want them to think and feel? And what do you want them to do? And by asking ourselves those questions, we start to unveil what those objectives actually are. Who are your target audiences? Where do they live? What do they think and feel? What are their attitudes? And where are we starting from in terms of awareness? What are the different narratives and messages that we want to get out there in terms of our reputation, our brand values, and so on? And finally, what is the action, if there is one, that we want the audience to take from our communications activities? So by asking those questions, we start to unveil a little bit more of what those objectives actually are. But it also gives us this lens that we can apply not only to the framework to help us measure the right metrics that speak to each of those three buckets, but that applies very nicely to the actual reporting itself. It then becomes much easier for you to explain what any given metric is and why it's important, instead of ending up in a scenario where you've got a dashboard with dozens and dozens of metrics and it looks very nice until you actually start trying to figure out what any of it means. Using this kind of approach allows you to put things in terms of terminology that will actually resonate with more senior stakeholders. So you can explain things in terms of, you can use different terminology or language so that it fits your business. But for instance, it might be awareness, reputation, and engagement instead of see, think, and do. But the buckets are broadly the same. So it's just an extra lens that we apply to help clients just focus and narrow a little bit in terms of having a bit more structure, be able to really articulate what any of their metrics mean. And it's also a really good prompting point as well for setting those objectives to help them to understand what exactly is it we're trying to achieve, when very often that can get a little bit lost sometimes in the actual doing of the do. So when you take that step back and ask these questions, it's a less overwhelming way sometimes to be able to figure out what those objectives actually were, what it was you were trying to achieve all along.
So we've had a couple of references to the audience here, and I think it's important that we always remember that we're doing earned media for a purpose, and that is to influence in some fashion for some purpose an audience. And so, Maria, perhaps you can talk about how we think about understanding audience behavior, audience perception, because that's a piece that's often missing when we're evaluating PR. We often focus on the counts and amounts of articles and things like that. Maybe we take it to a higher level and we're looking at, message pickup and tone. But really to be, to really understand what the impact is, you have to start looking at what the impact is on the audience itself.
Yeah, absolutely, Chip. You hit the nail here. We always do see metrics being used, and I resonate with Orla a lot in terms of the amount of metrics we sometimes use to try and report on something, and we eventually get lost. But what we see in most of the cases is that the most important metrics that really tell us how how our PR is doing and is it actually working is what we're always missing in the reporting, which is asking the audience if our end goal is to communicate with the audience, and ultimately, even if we use the same framework as see, think, do, we want them to see our communication, we want them to think a certain way, and we want them to do something. One thing that we're often missing is actually measuring the audience, whether they have seen our communication, whether it has changed their opinion ultimately and made them do something about it. And that's one of the missing links that we always see. But we do see now the industry turns the eyes into audience measurement. If a couple of years ago, PR industry specifically was was relatively alien to doing the surveys with the audience, doing the actual consumer research or audience research. It's often considered to be a marketing thing. We do now see a lot of PR teams are getting curious about it, getting actually used to the terminology of conducting a survey, conducting a focus group, speaking to the actual people, to the actual audience that we are at the end of the day trying to communicate to. That's what we see quite a lot picking up right now. And I think that's one of the greatest tips as well in PR. If you want to know whether or not your PR is working, ask your audience.
Yeah, I mean, we can have the shiniest reports, right? But if the audience isn't doing what we want them to do, then it all amounts
Absolutely.
to very little. Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room here, which is the term ROI. Kali, you and I had a spirited discussion about ROI, and it is the language that CEOs and other executive level folks tend to use when thinking about looking at the performance of all sorts of activities, including public relations and communications. But it immediately does conjure up that idea of financial metrics, which is what has led to some of the evil metrics of the past, which will remain unnamed here, but I'm sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And so, how do we address that? How do we think about ROI? How do we educate key stakeholders to go beyond it? Is it by looking at the audience impact? Is it really just having more detailed conversations up front about what our objectives are, so we can steer it to the things that actually do make an impact? Because frankly, most of the financial metrics in PR kind of made up. And so I think it would be interesting to get all of your perspectives on how we address that, because it is something that constantly comes up.
Thanks, Chip. And I always embrace our spirited, robust conversations on measurements. So we have talked about ROI. And I think one of the things that is most important for me is to recognize that ROI as the formula is a blunt instrument when you're talking about communications. Sometimes within a marketing setting where there are a direct purchase funnel connection, where you can have sales figures coming in for a specific campaign or link, ROI is absolutely valid and has a place. When we're measuring communication or PR as opposed to marketing, I think it becomes too blunt, and we need to focus instead on value. And I think what I said at the start is to really make sure that we've got the people. What is the people problem we're trying to solve? What are we trying to change as a result? And I think that's the ultimate ROI for me. And some of the most fascinating projects, so that award-winning work in our industry actually has that. So what has changed? It has people saved lives by becoming more educated, getting themselves to hospital earlier, have people change their behavior to be healthier, all sorts of changes in behavior, perception, and awareness are really what I would focus on in ROI metrics, rather than earned media and output. So ROI has a place. It's a formula, obviously stronger in a marketing setting, but I think focusing on value and change is where I think PR should spend most of our time.
Orla or Maria, do you want to weigh in on ROI?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that we always have to think about what is that purpose of PR and comms. And very often it is at that top end of the funnel. And it is things that are a little bit more intangible, because ultimately it's about engaging other humans to shift their perceptions, their awareness, their thoughts on things. That is not something that has a direct financial metric associated with it. And so I think that making sure that you're always bringing it back to what that goal is for the organization is how you have those conversations. So we're not just saying, oh, look, we increased favorability from X to Y, or, we increased message delivery from this to that, that you're explaining it in terms of why that stuff matters, why that's a good thing for the organization, how it links back to that organizational or business problem that they have that they're trying to address.
I think one of the interesting things for me in the ROI and the metrics that used in the PR and comms industry, and I'm coming from years of helping marketing people to measure how they perform. And as Kali said, ROI measurement is pretty much the centerpiece of the marketing, and it's much easier for them to define the ROI and actually assign the right metrics to it. But I was still um, I still saw quite a lot of use of the value metrics, the numbers, as we say. For example, the value of sponsorship. How do we define how much our sponsorships worth if we were to pay the same amount in the advertising value? So the similar kind of metrics as we now see in the PR and comms industry, that's called the forbidden word AVE, those made up numbers. I was very surprised actually when I kind of relocated from marketing into helping PR and comms, and I've seen the same numbers, which was quite funny, because it makes sense because we still struggle with the same thing. It means that we are trying to find that right approach to delivering the value. And in sponsorship and in marketing, and specifically, I have seen a massive shift before from providing these numbers into then ending up measuring whether or not they have changed the people's behavior, in terms of consideration, in terms of awareness, in terms of actual buying behavior, which is, again, much easier for the marketing to measure, because they can use the sales metrics. But for PR industry and specifically, I do see the same journey happening right now, from kind of shifting from the big numbers into making sense of the people's behavior and trying to understand how can we tie those metrics. And I think both marketing and comms do have the same challenge. Perhaps that was a couple of years ago for marketing. Now the PR and comms are shifting into this space, but it's a great lesson as well, where we do see the bigger shift from utilizing just the vanity metrics into providing the actual numbers that make sense.
Yeah, and I think, building upon this, one of the things that resonated in the opening presentation was looking at things through the eyes of your key stakeholders. And I think it's very easy for us as experts in PR and communications to get wrapped up in what we know and all of our experiences, but we need to think about how it's being perceived by others, whether that's the C-suite, or investors or whomever. And trying to think that through. And one of the questions that we've gotten from a viewer of the webinar is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but let's say that you work for a startup or a challenger brand that is not as well resourced as some of your competitors, and your C-suite is saying, "Why aren't we doing as well as so and so?" What suggestions would you have for that startup or challenger brand to communicate more effectively to those key stakeholders about the results that are being achieved relative to the disparate budgets and resources available?
I can jump in on this one. I think it's making sure that you're measuring the right things. So if you're looking at vanity metrics of a challenger metric versus a very well established one, if you're looking at things like impressions and volume, yeah, you're going to look like you're not performing as well. But when you actually cut through to the things that matter, so maybe looking at it in terms of specific topics and conversations, filtering it down to subjects that are, sorry, to articles that are maybe more impactful. So looking at things like significant and exclusive mentions, filtering it down to the stuff that actually matters and cutting away a lot of the noise that a well-established brand will be generating and that sometimes makes their figures look better than they actually are, is one way of going about that. But also looking at it over time. So you need to be able to demonstrate that shift over time. Yes, day one, it's not going to be brilliant. Day two, it may not be brilliant either. But when you can show that day two is better than day one, day three was better than day two, and so on, that is where you get the real value coming through.
All of that's so important, that trend over time. It doesn't matter where you start from. You're looking for shifts in awareness, shifts in those metrics, earned media metrics, shift in your community. Are you building a community behind you? There's lots of ways that you can measure engagement inside of that. Are your leaders growing their community in channels like LinkedIn, that type of thing? There are so many metrics that you can benchmark over time. But for that person that asked that question, get your baseline established, because it will be only up from here. Make sure you have the right metrics so that in a year's time, in 2 years' time, you can really show your journey.
I think one thing, if I could add here, and I completely resonate with Orla and Kali, if there's one thing that a challenger brand could do is to perhaps try and say and find out what the audience is actually looking for. And I think in many ways, the most established brands are having those massive strategies, they're having the budget, but they don't often look at those needs that the audience has in terms of how do you want to speak to me? If you're a brand, what kind of language resonates with me? What kind of proposition actually resonates with me? And it's something that, it's quite easy to measure. You can simply go and ask, your target audience. You just find out what really works with them. And then that could be your foundation as well to see whether or not you're matching the current expectations that people have in your industry, in your specific product setting. And then the metrics could follow in the same way that the bigger brands, they do have those massive budgets and campaigns, and ultimately they have more resources to cover up the holes. But if you find that gap and that niche, you can succeed much faster and much more effective just by simply figuring out what the audience is looking for.
And I want to pull on that thread a little bit if we could, because we think about, and I'm sure a lot of people have tuned in today trying to figure out, how can I prove my value? How can I justify my budgets? How can I convince my client to keep my agency? Whatever it might be. But a lot of proper measurement and evaluation is really identifying specific challenges and opportunities, helping you to improve what you're doing, not just prove that what you've already done is working. So how do we think about that? How do we surface those things that might be beneficial, particularly if we're someone without the deepest of pockets and we need to be really mindful of our choices?
Chip, I have a rule that has never failed me. And this is not looking at what more we should do, but using measurement and analytics to work out what we should stop doing. And it's a test of the measurement. So if your insights are strong, it should guide you into what isn't working, right? What campaigns, and there's so many organizations we work with that have annual events that are unquestioned. And they don't have that time out situation where you say, well, why do we actually do this event? Why do we all burn ourselves out with so much activity? What purpose does it serve now? It's been going for 20 years. What would happen if we stopped it? So my approach here is for PR programs, but also measurement programs, to test both. They should be directing you to what can be stopped rather than what can be started. What can we shut down? What is ineffective? And I think a fear of failure and a fear of using the measurement to point to what's not working sometimes stops us from thinking this way. But we know that, especially corporate affairs managers, PR and comms are doing more with less all the time, right? The number one complaint or concern they have in 2025 is workload has increased. So if we can look to measurement to stop some of that work and make sure that everything that we're doing is effective, I think that's a good test of any measurement program. It's also a good test of a PR team to really make sure that they're creating value.
I love focusing on things to stop doing because it really is, and this is something that goes far beyond just PR, but we're always trying to think about new ideas and things that we want to add in whatever kind of role, whether we're sales, marketing, communications, client service, but you have to make those intelligent choices, and proper measurement and evaluation helps you to understand where you should devote resources and perhaps where you should withhold those resources. We've gotten a question that it sort of is, in my mind, the holy grail question when it comes to measurement and evaluation, which is we all talk about the importance of measuring outcomes. But one of the real struggles that I think most of us have had over the course of our careers in this is trying to get the data that we need from clients in order to actually be able to assess that. And particularly as outside consultants, that's really challenging. Frankly, a lot of the internal teams can't even get access on the communication side to the sales data or other hard data that we would love to have access to. So in the absence of that information, how do we find a way to talk about outcomes in a way that is meaningful if we don't really have that level of data access from our clients?
I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is that you need to be really strong on what your audience journey looks like. So, thinking about what are all of the different touch points that an audience is likely to have with you or your content, thinking about what all of those different signals and signposts might be. Because it's not always going to be directly with you. There could be some proxy metrics along the way that help show the direction of travel. Things like search interest. So, people may not be coming directly to your website. And frankly, is that a normal user journey? Like, do people go directly to your website? Are they more likely to Google? So, looking at those sorts of things, that's information that is freely available. There is also a certain amount of information that you can get on web analytics that doesn't require you to have full access to your Google Analytics internally if your digital team is perhaps gatekeeping that a little bit. So it's thinking about what are those different signals and signposts? What would people be doing? Are they Googling things? Are they talking about it on social media? Is there organic discussion that's happening? Are there engaged communities that you need to be going and listening to? And we've mentioned communities a couple of times already this morning, and I think that's a really big trend that I'm seeing within marketing, PR, comms for the next year or so, that people are increasingly wanting a sense of community and they're going and finding like-minded people. And what we can see is that there is a lot of that information out there that is underutilized, and it's not necessarily expensive or difficult to get your hands on. But looking at things like Reddit, I think it's one of the most underutilized opportunities out there to really understand what is an engaged community around your area, whether it's fashion or cars or tech or whatever the particular subject matter is. They're really engaged communities. Listen. It's not always about being able to draw a very specific line between X piece of coverage and Y sale. That won't always be the case because people don't work in that kind of linear fashion. Brains are complicated and weird, and we go do things in all sorts of ways. So you might read something one day, and 3 weeks later, you've seen a social media post, and 2 months after that, you've heard someone talk about something. So thinking about what all of those potential signals are and how you can start to triangulate them to get a rough sense of what's that direction of travel. Are we seeing upticks in the right sorts of conversations, the right sorts of narratives and debates out there, the right sorts of behaviors? In terms of maybe things like web traffic or search interest that align with our activities. So being creative very often about that, but also being clear on what that audience journey looks like.
Mm.
And Maria, I assume this would also be an opportunity for us to look at audience research that would help generate the data that we could use to look
Absolutely.
at. So maybe we don't have the data already that we can tap into, but we can gather it.
Exactly that. In the absence of data, you can still create that data. You're absolutely right, Chip. It's often you can do a simple survey could do a work. It's a simple check-in whether or not your messaging is working, whether or not whatever positioning you're trying to create is actually working with people, and that's what we always try and integrate on top of the key metrics that we get from the media. And that's something that really indicates you don't need sales data that often. You can simply ask people whether or not they had a contact with your brand, whether or not they understand what your brand is really. Are they looking to purchase if it's a product and service, or any kind of future content you can simply measure through the surveys. I understand that, the general conception of the surveys is that it's rather a long exercise, is something that could be expensive. I'm really happy to say it's not, to be honest. The industry has evolved so much at this point. You can have a survey results done within a couple of days. And in most cases, that really gives you that kind of the pulse that you're looking for. It's not complicated at all. The budgets are not as expensive as we could think. But also one of the tips that I would like to give is in most cases, you would have a marketing team. In most cases, marketing team already have a survey going on, and it only takes a question or two that can help you personally, your team, to really understand your own metrics, your own journey. And it could be a collaboration. The more we try and tap into other departments, some of them, as Orla mentioned, could be a gatekeeper, but
Yeah.
some of them are willing to share the space. And if marketing team already has established a survey or a measurement program going on, that I think it's a brilliant resource that you can tap in and get your data.
Maria, it's about being relentless in that collaboration and cooperation. The amount of information that clients or agencies have at their fingertips now is so exhaustive, but it is not in the right places, and it's not shared in the right intervals or with the right people. And I think that's at the heart of this. And there's to your point all about listening, there's that classic case of a government department commissioning hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of market research, but they weren't actually reading the letters from the public that were being sent into the government department. So there's always a source of information available in your organization, Chip, and that's what I've come back to, that that market research is obviously the gold standard here in terms of creating that data for yourself and making sure that it's shaped from a communications and PR lens. That's really the important part. So you're going beyond awareness and looking at source of awareness for your earned media. But that collaboration and cooperation, that culture of sharing information and listening to everything that currently exists in your organization, a critical step that I think most people miss.
So I know nobody's talking about it, but there's this thing that I've heard about called AI, and I understand that it's really popular these days, and so I'm curious if you all have heard about it and how it's impacting how we assess the ROI of PR, how we think about it in terms of evaluation. Is it making things easier? Is it making things harder? And AI is permeating everything we do. In all seriousness, it is helping people to create more content more easily. It is helping us to analyze more data more quickly. So there's a lot of good. There's a lot of challenges. How are you generally thinking about AI in terms of measurement and evaluation today?
Well, I think there's two sides of it. One is the how we actually do the work. So, how can we use it to make us faster, more efficient, to get over some of the hurdles and challenges and sort of in a practical and logistical way that we've had in the past, which obviously we're making huge strides on. A couple of years ago, I was very against the idea that we could ever get AI or any kind of automation to analyze qualitative things like sentiment and messaging and so on. I've been proven completely wrong on that front. We've had really great success with that at CARMA. It's taken a lot of work to get there and a lot of testing and a lot of, this didn't work, let's try this thing. But there's a huge amount that we can do there that makes things easier and quicker to get our hands on the data that we need, and easier to get through huge volumes of content as well. So that was historically been a really big challenge within the industry, that it just takes so much time and so much manpower to get through very large volumes of content. That's not really the same challenge anymore. The other side of it is about AI as an audience. So understanding that it is now a new place like search that people go to for information. And what we can see, whilst there is no hard and fast methodology around this, but there's lots of research that shows that earned media plays very, very highly in terms of the information that AI is pulling back. So when you ask it a question about what's the best credit card or what's the best brand for eyeliner or whatever it may be, very often it is earned media content that is coming back within that. There isn't a hard and fast methodology for that at the moment. So it's not something that I would be recommending a client makes a KPI out of, that your share of AI search should be X%, for instance, because the methodologies are so shifting and changing. We don't have user data of exactly how people are actually searching. We can only use our best guess of the sorts of prompts that people put into AI to ask these kinds of questions. So I think of it as formative research to understand what are the sorts of articles that are being surfaced, the sorts of outlets. Are there things there that maybe weren't on our radar that actually come up quite prominently that we need to be making sure we're getting our content out in? So it's very much in that listening space for me at the moment, rather than being something that we should measure the way that we would measure a KPI or something that we're going to set ourselves a target on. But it's only going to become more important. It's obviously shifting a lot in terms of the way the different models operate. At the moment, they're very much powered by earned media. In a year or two's time, it could be paid. We don't really know what the business model for these LLMs is going to look like, but it's definitely something that we need to be listening to understand what do our audiences see when they go to an LLM and start to search for stuff related to our sector.
Maria?
Ola, and it's in the same vein, synthetic audiences, Chip, have come up as one of these huge hot topics in our industry, and I'm fascinated by the actual idea of a synthetic audience. I know Maria has very strong views, so I'll pass to her very, very shortly. But Gen AI search, GEO, and synthetic audiences right now are still used only in that planning and formation zone. They definitely don't have the rigor or the strength to actually come and look at and help us measure outcomes or impact. But what a fascinating tool to use when planning your campaign and seeing whether your messages land. Very, very important for industries that are restricted in going out live into market and asking surveying. So some use cases for it, but very limited at this point. Maria, your passion, your passion subject of synthetic audiences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Kali. I do have strong views, but as Orla mentioned, a year down the line, couple of years down the line, I could be proven wrong as well. You absolutely never know. But the principle of use of AI and the audience research is still a little bit tricky at the moment, because ultimately audience insights is perhaps one of the few places these days where you have to tap into a real person. Our opinions change as we go by a day, depending on what we see, what we hear, and who we talk to. And so it's as dynamic as every second could determine what we think and feel today. And so how would something that dynamic could be replicated in the AI world? That's, I think, still poses a challenge. But you're absolutely right, Kali. I think in the specific areas where communicators do have certain boundaries of what can they actually test, who can they tap to, because sometimes we are not communicating about specific consumer products and services. We are communicating about a specific niche B2B subject, or our audience could be completely different from an average person on the street all the way up to actual journalists or a politician. How do I tap into these harder to reach audiences? And this is where I think the synthetic audiences play a major role. They're trying to help the organizations like these that actually do struggle to tap into a harder to reach audiences or have certain restrictions. And it does make sense to test that, to utilize the AI through the testing period. As long as you have the robust back data. And as we all know, the principle of a use of AI is what do you feed into the model? And I think a lot of organizations right now do have the major challenge that they have right now is how much of the historical data, how much of the conversations with the actual people I need to have to build up the baseline of what the model can predict that person would think and feel if I show a message or I show a visual to them that hasn't existed before. My strong views are still here. We'll see in a year time, but there is a certain opportunity for sure. And it's definitely something that rather help or not hinder the process at the moment.
This is a panel of many strong views, and in just a moment, I will ask everybody to share final words of wisdom or closing thoughts as we wrap up our time together. Before we do that, though, I do want to encourage folks, if you have questions that we weren't able to get to, if you just want to continue the dialogue, feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We're all happy to communicate with you there. Reach out directly to CARMA, and we can continue the conversation as well. And just a reminder, there will be a replay of this available in the next couple of days. So if you missed something earlier, if you joined late, had to dip out for a client call, something like that, feel free to watch that replay and catch what you missed. But with that, to make sure that we do end on time here, because I'm a stickler for that when I host webinars, I'm just going to go across the panel for a quick 60 seconds final thought from each of you, and we'll start with you, Maria.
Absolutely, thank you. My final thought would be just to say that if you want to know whether or not your PR is working, go and tap into your audience. And it's as simple as asking a few questions, whether or not you have seen my message, have you resonated with my message, has it made you feel or do something that you intended to do? And these three, as long as you have the answer to these three simple questions, I think it's very easy to understand whether or not your PR is really working. And doing it by asking real people, in addition to measuring the presence in the media being the avenue to get to the people. I think that's ultimately your key to success, and it shouldn't be overlooked. It's not as complicated as we may think. It's not as long as we may think. It's not as expensive as we may think. So it's time to kind of bust the myth and actually try and go and try it. Yeah, that would be it.
Excellent. Orla?
Echoing that to an extent, be audience centric. Put the audience at the center of everything that you're doing, not your channels, not your platforms, not your activities. Think about what it is you need your audiences to do, to think, to be aware of, and center everything around that, your activities and how you measure it.
Collie?
All are good. I think ditto to Orla, but a couple of things, Chip. Pilot projects are really important when you're starting out to measure in an integrated way or doing something differently. Don't try and achieve everything all at once. A small one-off project to trial your new approach is often the best thing that we see clients do. Executive sponsors, incredibly important for collaboration between functions. So you need, at some point, you will need to get the buy-in and the trust from other functions to share those analytics and those important data sources. An executive sponsor, talk about your goals, talk about how you'd like to really elevate measurement, and that will need buy-in from execs, but buy-in from multiple functions. I think that's where we see the most success. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that I think if we step a little bit away from having to prove that PR caused everything, I think if we take a milder approach and say we're all in the mix, we all have a really strong role to play here. We're not going to claim anything that wasn't truly ours, but we do want to prove the value and the effectiveness of the work that we're doing. So pulling back a little bit from those bold statements of the achievements of the PR campaign, acknowledging that everyone's got a role. I think being a true team player can get a very successful win at the end.
And that's a great point to end on, because I think it is important for us to always understand, whether we are in PR or in advertising or in marketing or in sales, all of these things work together. And none of them in isolation will ever have the true success that they could have. And so if we want to be successful, we do have to be those team players. We need to encourage everybody around us to be team players as well. So on that note, I appreciate everybody who took the time to join us today, watching either live or on the replay. I appreciate Maria, Orla, and Kali taking the time out of their days to share some of their insights and wisdom and tips and all of that. We'd love to continue the conversation with you on the various platforms. So do feel free to connect with us and reach out. And so with that, that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.